I was 28 years old, standing on a Navy airfield with a name placard in my hands, when I saw a tattoo that would tear my entire life apart. I didn't know it yet. I thought it was just another pickup assignment. I had no idea it was the beginning of the truth I had been denied for almost 30 years. My name is Ren Sullivan. I serve in the United States Navy, and if you had asked me back then what my biggest problem was, I would have told you it was paperwork, or a broken air conditioner in the barracks, or the fact that my mother, Margaret Sullivan, still wouldn't tell me who my father was. That question had followed me my whole life. Every birthday, every school event where other kids had two parents in the bleachers, every time I filled out a form that asked for a father's name and I left it blank. My mother always gave me the same answer. He left before you were born. He didn't want us. Don't ask me again. So I stopped asking. I built a life around the silence. I told myself it didn't matter. But some wounds don't heal just because you stop talking about them. They just go quiet. And quiet wounds are the most dangerous kind, because you forget they're still open until something reaches in and touches them. That morning, my orders were simple. A 4-star Admiral was flying in for a classified briefing, and I was assigned to drive him from the airfield to the base. His name was Thomas Callahan. I had heard of him the way you hear of someone who is more legend than person. Decorated, respected. The kind of officer whose name made junior sailors stand up a little straighter. When his plane landed and he walked down the steps, I expected someone cold, distant. What I got instead was a man who shook my hand, looked me directly in the eye, and thanked me for picking him up like I was doing him a personal favor instead of following an order. I liked him immediately, and I didn't understand why that mattered so much until later. We walked toward the car, and that's when I saw it. His shirt sleeve had ridden up slightly as he reached for his bag, and there, on the inside of his wrist, was a tattoo. An old-fashioned compass, the kind you'd see on a hand-drawn nautical chart, with the needle pointing not to true north, but toward a specific constellation. The Big Dipper. My hands went cold. I have seen that exact tattoo my entire life. Same style, same placement, same star pattern. It's on my mother's wrist. She's had it as long as I can remember. When I was little, I used to trace it with my finger and ask her what it meant, and she would always say the same thing. So quiet, it was almost a whisper. It means someone I loved is still trying to find their way home. I told myself it was a coincidence. Compass tattoos aren't rare, but the exact same constellation, the exact same hand-drawn style, the exact same wrist. Something in my chest told me this was not a coincidence at all. Growing up, I used to make up stories about who my father might be. A pilot who died in a crash before I was born. A spy who couldn't tell anyone his real name. A man too ashamed of his own mistakes to ever come back. Anything felt better than the truth my mother gave me, which was simply that he didn't want us. I stopped believing the fairy tale versions by the time I was 12, but some tiny part of me never fully let go of the question. Who was he? Why did he leave? Was it really that simple? Or was there something my mother never told me? I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was 30 years of unanswered questions finally finding an opening. I said, without really deciding to say it, my mother has that same tattoo. Her name is Margaret Sullivan. I watched a 4-star Admiral go pale in front of me. Not nervous, not surprised in the ordinary sense. Pale, like the blood had actually left his face. He stopped walking. For a second, he didn't say anything at all, and in that silence, I felt the ground shift under my feet, even though I didn't yet understand why. Margaret Sullivan, he repeated, like the name itself hurt to say out loud. I asked him if he knew her. He didn't answer right away. He got into the car first. He asked me to drive, and for several minutes he just stared out the window like he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere almost 30 years in the past. Then he asked me a question that changed everything. How old are you, Petty Officer Sullivan? I told him. 28. He closed his eyes. I want you to imagine what that felt like. A stranger. A 4-star Admiral I had known for exactly 11 minutes, doing math in his head after hearing my age, and looking like the answer had just knocked the wind out of him. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now, and I still get chills thinking about it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. It was old, yellowed at the edges, soft the way paper gets when it's been carried and folded and unfolded too many times over too many years. It was addressed, in careful handwriting, to Margaret Sullivan. It had never been opened, and based on the postmark, it was 29 years old. "I need you to give this to your mother," he said. "I should have made sure she got it a long time ago." I asked him what was going on, who he was to her, why he had a tattoo that matched hers, why a letter addressed to my mother had been sitting unopened in his jacket for almost 3 decades. He was quiet for a long moment before he finally spoke, and his voice cracked in a way I don't think 4-star admirals are supposed to let happen in front of strangers. "Almost 30 years ago," he said, "I was in love with a woman named Margaret Sullivan. We were going to build a life together. And then, one day, she was just gone. No explanation, no goodbye. I spent years believing she left me because she didn't want me anymore." My stomach dropped. Because I was born 28 years ago, and he was talking about a relationship that ended almost 30 years ago, and he had gone pale the second I said my mother's name. I think some part of me already knew what he was about to say before he said it, but I still wasn't ready to hear it out loud. "We got matching tattoos," he continued, staring down at his own wrist. A compass pointed at the Big Dipper. It was a promise. No matter where the Navy sent either of us, no matter how far apart we would always find our way back to each other. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I watched him search my face for something. Maybe he was looking for her in my features. Maybe he was looking for himself. "I believed she abandoned me," he said quietly. "I've believed that for almost 30 years. I sat there in the driver's seat, hands frozen on the wheel, an unopened 29-year-old letter sitting between us, and I asked myself the question I couldn't shake. If he believed my mother abandoned him, then why did it feel like someone had been lying to both of them the entire time? I didn't know yet how right that instinct was. I didn't know that someone had spent 30 years making sure this exact conversation never happened. I didn't know that the man sitting next to me, staring at my face like he was seeing a ghost, might be the father I had been told my entire life did not want me. The drive to the base felt longer than it had ever felt before. Neither of us spoke much. Every few minutes I would glance over at him, this decorated 4-star admiral, sitting with an old letter in his lap like it weighed 100 pounds, and I would try to picture him 30 years younger. A young officer in love. A man who got a tattoo as a promise instead of a decoration. It didn't match the composed, commanding figure sitting next to me, and yet somehow it also made perfect sense. People don't stop being who they were just because time and rank and distance pile up on top of it. When we reached the base, he thanked me again. The same quiet, genuine thank you from the airfield, except now it carried a weight I hadn't understood the first time. Before he got out of the car, he turned to me one more time. "Whatever your mother tells you," he said, "please believe that I never stopped looking for a way to understand what happened. I just never had the truth to look with." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, honestly. Even now, looking back, all I knew was that I had to see my mother, tonight, and that once I showed her this letter, nothing in either of our lives would ever be the same again. If you were in my position right now, holding a letter that had been hidden from your mother for almost 30 years, would you open it before giving it to her? I didn't, but part of me wanted to. Tell me in the comments what you would have done, because what I found when I finally confronted my mother was worse than anything I could have imagined. I sat in my car outside my mother's house for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The letter sat on the passenger seat, and I kept staring at it like it might change its mind and open itself. 29 years old, never opened, addressed to Margaret Sullivan in handwriting, I now knew belonged to a 4-star admiral who had gone pale the moment I said her name. When I finally walked in, my mother was in the kitchen, exactly where she always was in the evenings, and for a second everything looked so normal that I almost lost my nerve. Almost. I set the envelope on the counter in front of her. "A man named Thomas Callahan asked me to give you this," I said. "He has the same tattoo as you, the compass, the Big Dipper." I have never, in 28 years, seen my mother's face change the way it changed in that moment. The color drained out of it. Her hands started shaking. She picked up the envelope like it was something that could burn her, and for a long, long moment, she didn't say a single word. "Where did you see him?" she finally whispered. "He's a 4-star Admiral, Mom. I picked him up from the airfield this morning. He knew your name before I even finished saying it." For a moment, I almost regretted saying anything at all. My mother had built a careful, quiet life for the two of us, and I had just walked in and dropped a bomb in the middle of her kitchen. But some truths don't wait for a convenient time. They arrive when they arrive, and you either face them or you spend the rest of your life pretending you didn't see them land. She sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped being able to hold her, and she stared at that envelope with an expression I can only describe as 30 years of grief arriving all at once. "You need to tell me the truth," I said. "Right now. Who is he to you?" She looked up at me, and I watched her decide, right there in front of me, whether to keep lying or finally let it go. I think some part of her had been waiting for this moment for almost 3 decades, dreading it and longing for it in equal measure. "His name is Thomas Callahan," she said quietly, "and he is your father. I want you to understand something. I had imagined this conversation 1,000 different ways over the years. I had imagined anger. I had imagined a stranger who didn't care. I had imagined a villain. I never once imagined the truth would be this complicated or this heartbreaking. You told me he abandoned us," I said. "You told me he didn't want us." "That's what I believed," she said, and her voice broke completely. "For 28 years, Ren, that's what I believed too." She told me everything, or at least everything she knew at the time, and I'm going to tell you exactly the way she told me, because you need to understand how deep this betrayal actually went. She and Thomas met when they were both young officers stationed together. She said falling in love with him felt inevitable, the kind of thing that happens so naturally you don't even notice it happening until you're already in the middle of it. They got the tattoos together on a whim, during a weekend leave, both of them laughing about how dramatic it was, and both of them meaning every bit of the promise behind it. No matter where the Navy sent them, no matter how far apart, they would always find their way back to each other. Then Thomas was assigned to a sensitive deployment, something connected to a defense procurement investigation that required absolute focus and 0 personal distractions. And that's when everything fell apart. My mother pulled the wooden box down from the top shelf of her closet, the same box I had seen 100 times growing up and had never once been allowed to open. Inside were old photographs, faded letters, and a stack of envelopes marked, in red ink, "Returned, do not forward." "I wrote to him every week," she said, "for months, and every single letter came back unopened, stamped like this. I thought he was rejecting me. I thought he'd made his choice, and his choice wasn't me, wasn't us. I didn't even know I was pregnant with you yet when the letters started coming back." She found out she was pregnant with me not long after, alone, believing the father of her child had chosen his career and his silence over her. She never told him. She said she was too proud, too hurt, too convinced that he already knew and simply didn't care. But he didn't know. He never knew. Here's the part that changed everything for both of them, the part neither of them found out until I sat in that kitchen almost 30 years later holding a letter that should have reached her decades earlier. There was a man standing between them the entire time. An officer named Captain Richard Hayes, who served alongside Thomas during that sensitive investigation. My mother said Hayes told her, gently, almost sympathetically, that Thomas had moved on, that the pressure of the investigation had changed him, and he no longer wanted the responsibility of a relationship holding him back. She believed him because Hayes was Thomas's trusted colleague. Why would he lie about something like that? At the exact same time, on the exact same investigation, Hayes was telling Thomas something entirely different. He was telling Thomas that Margaret wanted a normal life, a life without the uncertainty of a Navy relationship, and that she had asked him to pass along the message that it was over. Two people, deeply in love, both being lied to by the same man, at the same time, for the same reason. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to understand why anyone would do something so cruel. My mother had one theory. She said Hayes was ambitious, obsessively focused on that procurement investigation, and he believed any personal distraction, any emotional entanglement, could compromise Thomas's judgment and jeopardize the outcome he was chasing for his own career. So he made sure there was no relationship left to distract anyone. He simply erased it, one intercepted letter at a time. 29 years. Two people who loved each other, kept apart by a lie orchestrated by someone they both trusted. A child, me, raised believing my father simply didn't want me, when the truth was that neither of my parents ever stopped wanting each other. I asked my mother the question that had been building in my chest since I walked through the door. Does he know about me? Does Thomas know I exist? She shook her head. I don't know what he knows now, Ren. I only know what I believed for almost 30 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas Callahan's face when he did the math on my age. I kept thinking about my mother's hands shaking around that envelope. And I kept thinking about a name I had never heard before that day. Captain Richard Hayes. A man who had reshaped 3 lives with nothing but lies and returned mail, and who, as far as I could tell, had never once faced any consequences for what he did. I decided that night that I wasn't going to let it stay that way. I started digging. Old personnel records, deployment schedules, anything that could confirm the timeline my mother had given me. And that's when I found something that made my blood run cold. Richard Hayes wasn't just some minor officer who crossed paths with my parents once. He had been promoted, repeatedly, throughout the exact years he was destroying their letters. His career had climbed, step by step, built partly on the very investigation he'd used as an excuse to tear 2 people apart. I reached out to a contact who still worked near his old command, trying to find out where he was now, whether he was even still active, whether there was anyone left who could confirm what my mother told me. What I found instead was a name I didn't expect. Evelyn Hayes, his wife. I got a message back from her 3 days later, and it contained a single line that made my hands go cold all over again. I've known what my husband did for years, it said. I have proof, and I've been waiting for someone brave enough to finally ask. If you were sitting where I was sitting, staring at a message from the wife of the man who destroyed your parents' entire lives, offering you proof, would you trust her? Or would you assume it was a trap? I had about 10 seconds to decide, because the very next line of her message told me she wanted to meet in person, that same week, and that what she had to show me would change everything I thought I understood about my father, my mother, and the man who had been lying to both of them for almost 30 years. I sat in my car after reading her message, and I asked myself the same question I think anyone in my position would ask. Was I chasing the truth, or was I chasing revenge dressed up as the truth? I told myself I only wanted answers. But if I'm being honest with you the way I've been honest with you this whole time, some part of me already wanted Richard Hayes to feel even a fraction of what he'd stolen from my family. I said yes. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. Evelyn Hayes met me at a quiet coffee shop far from any base, and the first thing she did was slide a thick folder across the table before she even said hello. I've been carrying this for a long time, she said. I just didn't know who to give it to. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Part of me had spent the drive over telling myself to stay calm, to treat this like an investigation and not like the most personal thing that had ever happened to me. It didn't work. Nothing about sitting across from a stranger who had spent years watching her husband's guilt eat away at him quietly, while my family paid the price on the outside, felt like it could ever be calm. Inside that folder was everything. Copies of the original letters my mother had written to Thomas, the real ones, never delivered. Internal memos where Richard Hayes had requested my mother's mail be redirected through his office, citing security concerns that, according to Evelyn, never actually existed. A handwritten note in Hayes' own writing, describing a plan to keep Thomas focused on the investigation by removing what he called personal distractions. He told himself it was for the mission, Evelyn said, her voice tight with years of buried anger. He told himself he was protecting Thomas's career, the investigation, the Navy. I don't think he ever let himself think about what he was actually doing to 2 people who loved each other, or to the child they didn't know they had. I asked her why she kept all of it instead of destroying it, or simply staying silent the way she had for so many years. Because I always knew, someday, someone would come looking for the truth, she said. I just didn't think it would be his daughter. She told me Hayes had never fully let go of what he'd done. She said there were nights over the decades when she'd catch him staring at old photographs from that command, saying nothing, looking like a man carrying something heavier than rank or reputation. Guilt, she said. Quiet, buried, cowardly guilt, the kind a man carries when he knows exactly what he did and simply chooses comfort over confession, year after year after year. With Evelyn's folder in hand, I finally had what I needed. Not rumors, not a 30-year-old story pieced together from two broken hearts. Proof. Real, documented proof that Captain Richard Hayes had deliberately intercepted and destroyed correspondence between my mother and my father and had lied to both of them, for his own ambition, for almost 30 years. I could have gone straight to Navy authorities. Part of me wanted to, but I decided I needed to look him in the eye first. I needed him to know that the truth had finally found its way home, the same way that Compass Tattoo had always promised it would. Before I went to find him, I sat with everything for a full day. I read every letter Evelyn had given me, in order, watching the timeline of my parents' love story get quietly dismantled, one intercepted envelope at a time. By the end of it, I wasn't just angry on my own behalf anymore. I was angry for the two 20-something-year-old officers who had no idea, back then, that someone they trusted was rewriting their entire future without either of them ever getting a vote. I found him at a small house outside Norfolk, retired now, gray-haired, looking nothing like the ambitious young officer who had once decided 3 people's lives weren't worth as much as his own career. When I told him my name, I watched recognition hit him almost instantly. He knew exactly who I was. He knew exactly what I was there for. I laid the folder on his table the same way Evelyn had laid it on mine. 29 years, I said. You had 29 years to tell the truth, and instead you let 2 people believe the person they loved most had simply stopped caring. You let me grow up believing my father abandoned me. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, quietly, almost like the weight of it had finally become too heavy to carry alone, he admitted it, all of it. He said he was young, ambitious, terrified that anything personal would derail the investigation that was supposed to define his career. He said it started as one intercepted letter, something he told himself was temporary, just until the investigation closed. And then one letter became another, and by the time he realized how far he'd taken it, he said he was too afraid of what it would cost him to ever undo it. I told myself it didn't matter, he said. I told myself they'd find their way back to each other eventually, if it was meant to happen. They didn't, I said. Because you made sure of it for almost 30 years. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just sat there, an old man finally facing the one conversation he had spent 3 decades avoiding. I want to tell you honestly, in that moment, I thought about revenge. I thought about every way I could destroy this man's remaining reputation, his peace, everything he had left. He had earned every bit of my anger, and I don't think anyone would have blamed me for using it. But I thought about my mother's face when she saw that envelope. I thought about my father going pale on an airfield, doing math in his head about a daughter he never knew existed. And I realized that burning Richard Hayes to the ground wouldn't give either of them back a single one of the 29 years they lost. Revenge doesn't rebuild anything. It only adds more wreckage to wreckage that's already there. So I chose something different. I chose the truth, laid out fully and formally, submitted through proper Navy channels, with every document Evelyn had given me and every admission Hayes had just made. Not a quiet, private punishment. An official record, permanent and undeniable, of exactly what he had done and exactly who he had hurt to do it. The investigation that followed confirmed everything. Hayes's actions, the falsified security justifications, the intercepted correspondence, all of it became part of the official record. Whatever comfort he thought he'd earned in retirement, he lost the moment that file was opened. But the part of this story I actually want you to remember isn't what happened to Richard Hayes. It's what happened to my parents. I arranged for my mother and Thomas to meet, for the first time in almost 30 years, at the same diner outside Norfolk, where I had first sat down with him weeks earlier. I wasn't in the room when they saw each other again. I didn't need to be. My mother told me later that neither of them said a single word for almost a full minute. They just stood there, two people who had spent nearly 3 decades believing the other one had simply stopped loving them, finally understanding that the love had never actually gone anywhere. It had just been buried under 29 years of someone else's lies. They talked for hours that day, about the letters, about the years they lost, about me, and everything they had both missed without ever knowing the other one wanted to be there. As for me and Thomas, that relationship didn't heal overnight, and I'm not going to pretend it did just to give you a neat, easy ending. 30 years of silence doesn't disappear in a single conversation. But we kept talking. We kept showing up. He told me about the investigation that had consumed those years, about the tattoo, about the version of himself that had gotten it as a promise he fully intended to keep. I told him about growing up without him, not to punish him, but because he deserved to finally understand exactly what his silence, however unintentional, had cost. A few months later, at a small dinner with my mother, I called him something I had never called anyone in 28 years. Dad. He didn't say anything back right away. He just reached over and squeezed my hand, and I watched a 4-star admiral, a man who had commanded entire fleets, sit there and quietly cry at a kitchen table. I think about that compass tattoo a lot now. A promise made almost 30 years ago by 2 young officers who had no idea how badly it would be tested or how long they'd have to wait for it to finally come true. Someone spent nearly 3 decades trying to make sure that promise never got kept. And in the end, it didn't matter. The truth found its way home anyway. It just took a daughter neither of them knew they'd raised together to finally point the compass in the right direction. If someone in your life has been lying to you quietly for years, would you want to know the truth, even if it changed everything you thought you understood about your own family? I think about that question more than I expected to. Tell me what you would do, because I still don't know if I'd make the same choice twice. I just know I'm glad I made it once.